Hello and welcome back. So today we'll be doing another top 10 type video, though not exactly a top 10. We'll definitely see more than 10 guys here, but you'll come away from this knowing which left wingers you can target at different positions in the draft. But you do want to pair this with a drafting strategy. It shouldn't just be a blind pick one of these guys and you're okay. You have to pair this with a strategy for your draft so you know what you're targeting, where you're targeting those players in the draft. So if you don't have a strategy, check out the description below. I've got a playlist for you. It's 4 simple rules, 4 videos that should help you improve your draft strategy and the focus that you have going into your draft. So as we look at the 5-year goal per game data, the first thing that jumps out to me here is that there's only one player who's above this 50 goal pace. This is this green line right here, and that's Alex Ovechkin. So his production has been insane despite his age, and we'll cover that in just a second. But this is the 40 goal range. Anybody that's above a 40 goal pace. So 40 goal pace is .487. Kyle Connor just a hair below that, but just given how much work he's done for my personal team over the years, I decided to give him that 40 goal status. And then all these guys in between these two lines are between 30 and 40 goals. So there's a couple of interesting names and files here. We'll get into most of these players over the course of this presentation, but let's start with Ovechkin. There isn't going to be much in this file that you don't already know about him. Arguably the greatest goal scorer of all time. And for those of you wondering if Austin Matthews just got disrespected there, in the first 6 NHL seasons, Ovechkin averaged 50.1 goals per season. Matthews was at 43.1. And then over his last 5 seasons, Ovi is averaging 49.5 goals per season, which is absolutely incredible. The general sense here is that players hit their prime in their early to mid-20s and then plateau. Ovi hit his peak immediately with 52 goals his rookie season. He won the Calder Trophy over Sidney Crosby that year because of that 50-goal season, and he still continues that pace today. So why would you draft him? Well, let's work backwards, shall we? Why wouldn't you draft him? So some of the narratives, he just lost Nicklas Backstrom, who may end up missing the entire 22-23 season. No big deal, though, because last year, the line of Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, and Wilson was the 12th highest scoring line in the league, according to MoneyPuck.com. What about he's getting old? He's getting up there. You can see the gray hairs in his beard. But he only missed a combined 31 games over the last 5 seasons. And that's even more impressive when you factor in that number at the bottom, the hits, 2.01 hits per game last year. So he's not a guy that shies away from physical contact, and yet he still stays relatively healthy. What about, you don't think Washington's going to be the same team? They're on the decline, blah, blah, blah. Last year, their offense was 10th in the league in goals for per game, and they were number 1 on the road in the NHL. So they're still a very good team. They got hampered by their goaltending. They had below league average goaltending, and if they had league average goaltending, they probably would have made it past the first round in the playoffs. So still a very good team, very competitive. The other, maybe one other complaint you have, he doesn't block a lot of shots, and yeah, you got me there, but literally every other offensive category, he's still elite, and he covers almost all of those offensive categories. That's a phenomenon that I mentioned in a previous video. Usually, in the first few rounds, you want to find guys who cover 4 to 5 categories and are elite in those categories. And then later on in the draft, you kind of have to narrow in and choose either an elite guy for 1 or 2 categories or a solid producer for 3 or 4 categories. But Ovechkin, he's still elite and he covers 4 or 5 categories. So you can see here, his goal totals, obviously 53 goal pace, .64 last year. That's really good still. Despite his age, he's putting up a massive goal pace. And then if you look at his points, so his 1.04 point per game 5-year average is very good. Last year, 1.16, 90 points in 77 games. That was his highest point per game average since his career high 1.51 points per game in 2009-10. So he's clearly not slowing down. He's actually been increasing over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of his production. Now, obviously, Ovechkin shoots the puck a ton, and that's something you'd come to expect. He was 3rd in the league, edging out David Pastrnak, and he almost never dips below 4 shots per game. And then on top of that, his power play numbers were really good as well, which you would also expect. And that's 16 power play goals. That's tied for 3rd in the league. Now, you may expect him to lead the league, but obviously last year there were a couple factors. Chris Kreider kind of went off and did his own thing. And then Leon Draisaitl is always up there at the top as well. But that third in the league number, that's kind of what you would expect from Ovechkin. And then as I previously mentioned, his hits per game, 2.01, that is a reason to target him. So he covers some categories. And typically at the top of your draft, you're not going to find hits coverage. You're going to find a lot of offensive totals, but you're not going to get this 2 hits per game average. So the fact that he gives you all of these categories, that could make him value at ADP 12.9 at the back end of the first round or the early part of the second round. I haven't really seen him slide too much in mock drafts. Nobody seems to be shying away from him at his old age. And actually, the sneaky play may be to pick up Evgeny Kuznetsov this year at ADP 66.6 in the 6th round. Although, now that I say that out loud, that may be a bad omen, so maybe stay away from Kuznetsov. But you get exposure to Ovechkin, and you get that 12th in the league line production when Tom Wilson's back. So he's not healthy to start the season, but Kuznetsov is going to be their number 1 center for the year if Backstrom does not make it back. So that could be the sneaky play if you want access to Ovechkin, although I do understand that Kuznetsov doesn't cover that many categories. But still, if you're looking at Ovechkin on the board and you're wondering, do I go there this year? Do I not? He's still elite. He's still the Ovechkin that we know and love to watch on a day-to-day basis. So he's definitely value at that 12.9 pick. Back at the list here, you see Draisaitl at ADP 2.3. He's the second highest goal scorer on this list. Obviously he's a choice that you're going to want in the top 4, picks overall. He's going at 2.3. But somebody asked me in the comments section on one of my videos whether or not it could be a better strategy to choose Draisaitl over McDavid at number 1 and use him as a left wing, and then you can save your center spot for a deeper play who can still get you a point per game. And I really did have to think about that one for a bit because, one of my draft rules is that I just, if I'm picking number 1, I just pick McDavid. I don't think about it. And I didn't do that one year. I went with Kucherov coming off the 128-point season, and he was a goal-scoring right winger. I was thinking I was doing the right thing, but, you got to take the best player available, and I made the mistake and didn't go with McDavid, so kind of bit me in the ass there. But with all of that said, there is one situation where this makes sense, where you would draft Draisaitl ahead of McDavid. So if your league has a face-off wins as your category, or if you're in a points league where face-off wins are weighted heavily or even moderately, that's where Draisaitl could be your number 1 pick, though it still feels a little bit weird to say out loud. So according to StatMuse, he led the league in total face-off wins last year. And if you can add that category to your team and slot him as a winger, and then use the additional center spots to plug in other face-off specialists like Bergeron, Lindholm, O'Reilly, Kopitar, Horvat, Hurdle, somebody like that, then you've kind of cracked the code to winning your league. Because your wingers are going to put out your number 1 goal-scoring winger is going to put up a ton of face-off wins, and then you're also going to have centers putting up face-off wins. But if you don't have face-offs, he's still an incredible fantasy option. He had a 56 goal pace last year. He's consistently averaging 45 plus goals per season. His point totals are higher than Ovechkin's and almost anyone else in the league with a 1.32 5-year average. That's 3rd in the league behind Kucherov and McDavid. And he surpassed that last year at 1.375 for 110 points in 80 games. Shot totals aren't as high as Ovechkin, but still good for 18th in the league, so still targetable for shots. And one of the best to ever do it, Ovechkin, he's going to have that advantage over Draisaitl, but the point production is a humongous gap between the two. And if you recall last year, around the end of October, the Oilers' power play was clicking at a 47.8% pace, which was obviously unsustainable, but Draisaitl and McDavid did continue their power play point production regardless of that. So 0.51 power play points per game, 4-year average. And last year, he hit 3rd in the league for power play point per game average. So he's one of the best on the power play. So if your league weights power play goals, and that he was number 2 in power play goals or power play points, so he's top 3 in power play points, that could be a really good reason to target him. Not necessarily over McDavid, because McDavid will get you power play points as well. But if you have power play goals, that's where you might choose Draisaitl over McDavid. And then look at the face-off wins. That's a ton. So that's that could be a reason where you pick Draisaitl over McDavid at 1st overall. And then the only other time you wouldn't take McDavid 1st overall is if you're league has a very heavily weighted goal category, and you want to go with Matthews because Matthews is the only guy to get a 60-goal pace and hit 60 goals in the last 10 years. So Stamkos did it several years ago. Matthews did it last year. You could make the argument. Typically, I would prefer to go with McDavid number 1, but with Leon Draisaitl, the other thing to mention is dual position eligibility. So he's a center left wing, and that may make the difference because there's not much of a difference between those 3 elite players. Just something to keep in mind as you go through your draft. That positional flexibility could come in handy later on. Now, up next is a player who I've had on almost every one of my teams over the past 3 to 4 years because I always got him in the 4th to the 6th round, and he's always performed at an elite level, and that is Kyle Connor, who I believe is value here at ADP 28.6. So let's take a look at Kyle Connor. He basically entered into the upper echelon of left wingers last year after a 1.17 point per game season where most of his teammates had down years. He drove that offense, but he's always been a consistent shooter and a goal scorer with a .48 goal per game 5-year average, 40 goal pace, and 4 shots per game last year, good for 7th in the league. Now, his 5-year average is a little bit lower at 3.12, but that would still be excellent category coverage for shots. If you're looking at his power play numbers, very good. 0.35 power play points per game, 28 power play points last year, but the power play goals are a little low for how good of a goal scorer he is, and hopefully Rick Bowness and his assistants can come in and tweak that power play, which was 17th in the league last year, which does seem a bit low considering all the talent that they can roll out on that unit. So hopefully there are some changes to the power play, but even if there's not, he's very prolific on the power play in terms of point production, just not goals. But all in all, with Connor, you get elite shot volume, you get elite left winger goal scoring, and last year he put up elite point production, but he may regress a little bit from that number and go back a little bit closer to his average, just given that Ehlers will be back and maybe league scoring across the entire NHL will return back to a more normal level. But even if that happens, he'd be around a point per game player, and at ADP 28.6, to get that coveted and scarce goal scoring and shooting coverage with those point totals and power play numbers, he's definitely worth that pick in my opinion. Now, looking at the board, normally I would work down in order, but I've noticed that in my mock drafts, one player has been going in that same range, often before Kyle Connor, and that didn't make any sense to me when I was looking at it. I mentioned that in a couple of mock drafts too. So let's take a deeper dive into the Chris Kreider file. But before we do, notice where Kreider is on this list in the middle of the chart here, kind of mid-pack in terms of goal production. That's a little bit below. That's probably a 34 goal pace. But let's take a look at the 21-22 numbers and compare that. So right here, you notice he rockets to the top of the goal scoring list. 0.642 goals per game. Obviously, he scored 52 goals last year. But that was a 0.22 goal per game deviation from his 5-year average. So what he accomplished last year was nothing short of amazing. He's always been that power forward with that 40 goal potential, but he just never seemed to put the physical tools and the goal scoring together until last year where he absolutely exploded. So as we look at this file, you'd own him for a few different reasons. Obviously, the goal production was high last year, and I think we all expect a bit of a regression from that 52 goal number, closer to his 5-year average pace of around 34 goals. But if you split the difference and he gets 40 goals this year, that's still good value at that ADP. And then if you look at the shot numbers, he took a jump last year to 3.18, which was very good. But in the past, he was hovering around 2.5 range. And in 2021, he was at 2.04 shots per game. So he did take quite a jump in that department. I'd expect a little bit of regression for his shot totals, just based on all of that. And then where Kreider shines is in the points leagues that weight power play production, especially power play goals. He was number 1 in the league in power play goals, ahead of Leon Draisaitl. Never thought I would say that. And he was 14th in the league for power play points last year. And then the only change to that top 5 overall power play unit is losing Ryan Strome. And I don't think that impacts Kreider at all. He makes his living in front of the net, and Fox, Panarin, and Zibanejad are all still on that unit, and they're going to be throwing pucks at his feet and letting him tip them in. So I don't see that much changing in terms of his power play production. And then it is worth noting that his 1.74 hits per game, that is targetable. He's been above 2 hits per game twice in the last 5 years, so you're getting a pretty good amount of hits coverage as well. The only thing here is I'm personally going to stay away from Chris Kreider this year just because I know how it feels to be a Rangers fan and get excited about something and then have it totally backfire, get the carpet pulled out from under you. I'd rather just root for my team without the added stress of hoping Kreider backs up a career year with another career year. But the more I look into the file, the less crazy it seems that he's going at ADP 26.8 in the 3rd round, because he does get some good coverage, and that hits number is very tough to find at the top end of the draft. So last year he went in the 12th round in my league, and now he's jumped up to the back end of the 2nd or early in the 3rd round. So it just looks like a little bit of a reach for me. It's still a good file. You could still go there. You're not going to get the 52 goals, but you'll still get between 34 and 40 goals. That's what I would venture to a guess at just based on his average. I just personally won't be going there. Now, as we look back at the 5-year average data, I'd like to remind you that you can have access to all of these charts and graphs, and you can have them on hand during your draft for only $3 a month on my Patreon in the description below. And for $5, you get that plus access to our community Discord channel, where I prioritize answering patrons' questions about their specific teams and try to help you use the data to make better, more informed decisions during your draft and during the season. So, sometimes a trade comes across your desk. You need to make a decision between 2 guys. Sometimes you're in your draft and you're trying to choose between 2 guys, or you're trying to fit them into your strategy. You can find all those tools in the description below in the Patreon link. And I quickly want to shout out all my current patrons. The support has been incredible, and the Discord channel has been a lot of fun thus far. So I want to thank you guys. It really means a lot. Now, in other videos, I've covered Marchand and DeBrincat in detail. I'll also be putting out their player short videos, hopefully this week, so stay tuned for those. But one guy I haven't really covered yet is Steven Stamkos at ADP 20.5. So let's take a little bit more of a dive into Stamkos' file. Some people have been asking about him. Why would you own Stamkos this year? Well, first things first, dual eligibility. He's a center left wing, one of 2 people on this list or in this video that are center left wing eligible. So that gives you positional flexibility. You can use him as a goal scoring winger, or you can use him as a center. You can keep those center spots open for a deeper point per game assist heavy guy, or whatever category coverage you need later. So that does give you a little bit more flexibility. Obviously, he can still score goals, maybe not 60 a year like he used to, but still averaging a 40 goal pace over the last 5 years. His shot numbers aren't quite as high as some of the other elite goal scorers, but that 2.97 is very good, and his 5-year average is 2.8, so he's very consistent in that range. And unlike some of the other players, I'd categorize Stamkos as a target for assists as well. So he got 0.79 assists per game last year, 64 assists in 81 games, and he has been above 1 assist per game before, and he's generally in that 0.65, 0.75 range, but the ceiling is there, where he could end up being an assist per game guy. It just depends on what his team needs. If they need goals, he's a goal scorer. If they need assists, he's a setup guy. So, that could be one other reason to target him. And then just the raw point per game numbers, 1.135 year average, 1.30 last year. He did have one season in his last 5 years where he was a little bit down. It was a 0.89 point per game in 2021. But every other year in the last 5, he's averaged above 1.1 points per game. So consistently at the top of the league in terms of point production. Why might that be? Well, his power play numbers are some of the best in the league, and that 0.44 power play point per game was 11th in the league. His 16 power play goals were tied for 3rd with a number of other players. And if you look at the second half of the year data, now I did that video a couple weeks ago, second year analysis. You can check that out in the description below or in one of my playlists. Him, Kucherov, and Hedman were tied for number 1 overall with 22 power play points in the second half of last season. So that tells me that the Lightning are a veteran team. They know when to turn it on, and when they need to, they crank it up to 11 and they dominate the entire league. So getting exposure to that top unit in Tampa is a must, especially if you're in a weighted power play points or weighted power play goal category league. And of those 3 guys that I just mentioned, Stamkos has the lowest ADP. So he could be the best value between Hedman and Kucherov, but I would love to get any of those three in the first 2 rounds of the draft. One last little noteworthy item, 1.14 hits per game last year, 1 hit per game in 2021, 1.21 the year before that. So not necessarily targetable for hits, but I was a bit surprised to see that, given that he's been injured a little bit in the past. And, that injury history may be the only reason to stay away from Stamkos. But despite the narrative, he played 81 games last year, 38 and 56 the year before that, so a little banged up, 57 and 70. Those were the 2 COVID years, but then 82 full season the year before that, and 78 games played the year before that. So 3 of the 5 years he's been really healthy. The other 2 he dealt with some injuries, some COVID issues and whatnot, but his production never really dipped even when he was out of the lineup. Not scoring while he was out of the lineup, but when he came back he was still productive. And his point floor would probably be that 0.89 point per game pace. That's 72 points over an 82 game season. And at that ADP, that would kill you if he was a 0.89 point per game guy, but that was the outlier. So every other season, he's been above 1.1 points per game, and he's still averaging a 38 goal pace. So he's still definitely a guy you'd target for goals, shots, some assist production, and especially that power play number. That would be the main reason to go to this file. And then you get that dual position eligibility. That makes him a little bit more valuable than some of the other guys, and that may have bumped his ADP and kept him in the second round. He usually goes in this range, and he's basically been consistently drafted in this range for the last number of years for these reasons. So as we return to the list, you'll notice that most of these guys, you do have to pay a premium to get the goal scoring. So this is, first round, early second round. That's very early in the draft. Kyle Connor, back end of the second round, early third. Same with Stamkos. Marchand, I've covered him before in terms of his draft value. That's incredible value if you have an IR spot available. DeBrincat, we've covered in the right winger video. But one guy I haven't covered yet, and he could be value. It's one of the only value plays in this middle section, and that's Filip Forsberg at ADP 57.7. So let's take a look at the Filip Forsberg file. Why is Filip Forsberg value in the 5th round? Last year, 0.608 goal per game. That's a 50 goal pace in an 82 game season. In addition to that 50 goal pace, his point per game numbers took a huge jump last year from his 5-year average of 0.90 to 1.21 points per game. So a 0.31 point per game difference. That could mean he's a regression candidate as far as point production. That doesn't mean he will regress. It means that he's slightly more likely to regress back to his average, though I'd say he's less likely to do that than his teammate Matt Duchene. Forsberg's shot volume is pretty good as well, 3.27 shots per game, good for 28th in the league, and his power play production is very good at a 0.39 power play point per game pace. That's 27 power play points last year, so you're getting that power play production, and he's trended up in that category every year, so 0.15, 0.22, 0.33, and then 0.39 last year. So if that trend continues, he could be an even better power play producer this year. In addition to what you would expect from the goal scoring and the shot coverage, his hits coverage isn't elite by any stretch, but it is significant enough to choose him over a player in the same ADP range who doesn't hit as much. Maybe Elias Pettersson, for example, doesn't hit, and he's usually available in the same general range as Filip Forsberg. So that could be a reason to target him. You're getting a goal-scoring winger, and he's a guy who does hit a little bit. He'll get you shot coverage as well, and the power play numbers are good as well. So in terms of Nashville, I'm in the camp that Matt Duchene likely won't repeat what he did last year. I would give Forsberg a much better opportunity to hold up his fantasy relevance. At least, even if he does regress, his 5-year average is still strong, and he does cover some more categories. He is that elite goal scorer, and he does shoot the puck, so those aren't likely to go away. The only problem, and it is a big problem, the only reason that he's probably available in the 5th round is health. So Forsberg hasn't come close to a full season in the last 5 years. So he's played 67 games, 64 games, 63 games, 39 games in the shortened season, and then 69 games. So what I'll say about this is that I usually err on the side of getting the player with a higher ceiling and riding out the injuries the way, that way I have a more potent offense for when my playoff matchups are. And then B, when Forsberg came back healthy in the second half last year, he was 15th in the league in point per game average with a 1.31. And that was 50 points in 38 games. So the injuries don't slow down his production at all. And if you can add 1.31 point per game production down the stretch in your fantasy regular season and into your fantasy playoffs, that may be the reason to take a little bit of a risk and grab him in the 5th round. If he drops below that ADP, definitely jump on him for sure, because adding that kind of production to boost your playoff numbers, that could make the difference between winning and losing. Now, another player who was really close to him on that list was a guy that I've had in the past. He's very difficult to get, though, because he's now ADP 33.4 in the 3rd round, and that's Jake Guentzel. So, I just highlighted injury history with Filip Forsberg, so now we're going to talk about the exact opposite. So, in the last video, the right winger video, I talked about his line mate, Brian Rust, being a nice deeper option to grab to get access to Crosby and Guentzel. So is Guentzel worth the 33.4 ADP? Well, if you're targeting elite goal and shot production in that 3rd, 4th round range, provided he drops there, then he is worth it. He will get you around a 40 goal pace if you look at his 4-year average. So the reason I went with a 4-year average for this file is because 5 years ago, he did have a bit of a down year with 22 goals in 80 games and only 48 points in that 80 games as well. But that was his first full season in the NHL. So it was after his actual rookie season where he put up 33 points in 40 games, and then he put up 21 points in 25 playoff games en route to that Stanley Cup. But that first full 80-game season, that could have been his sophomore slump year. So I would factor that in terms of, that seems to be a typical narrative that people have that sophomore slump. And then, he's pretty much, put that in the past, and he's been productive since then. And that, if you're looking at that number, that could set his floor. So I wouldn't expect him to go any lower than 22 goals in a season, because that would be kind of crazy given his average, his 4-year average of a 39 goal pace. His shot numbers, 3.47 shots per game, 19th in the league. Very good there as well. His point production has been very good. And again, without that sophomore slump season, he averages 1.03 points per game. And he exceeded that last year at 1.1. So not much, you wouldn't expect much regression there. He's a little bit over, but not crazy over. And then that's, if he regresses to his point per game average over the last 4 years, that's definitely ownable in that range. Now, his power play totals are good, but not great, considering all the talent that Pittsburgh puts out on that PP1. I'd look for a bump from that number this year if and when they are healthy. And that seems to be the major concern in Pittsburgh every year. They miss a lot of key players for long stretches, but not Jake Guentzel. So one season, 1920, he only played 39 games. And that was the COVID year that got cut short. But every other year, he's missed a combined total of 6 games. So 82, 39, 56, 76. So 3 of those seasons, he played every single game. And then one season, he missed 6 games. And then obviously he had that injury season right in the middle. So they're very hard to predict, injuries, but he does seem to avoid them thus far in his career. Hopefully I didn't just jinx him. But in conclusion here, Guentzel, very consistent 40-goal guy, over a point per game, top 20 shot volume, should get you exposure to an elite power play unit when they're healthy. And he's looking like that 33 ADP range is right about where he should go. And I'd venture a guess that he'll outperform some of the guys that are picked ahead of him. So he could be value at that 33.4 ADP. It just depends on what you're looking for. Now, as we return to the list, just quickly glance at the bottom of this. JVR not ranked by Yahoo, probably visible in some mock draft rooms, but not on the main page. And I wouldn't advise targeting him this year, maybe as a waiver play if he starts out hot. Huberdeau, definitely an assist guy more than a goal scorer. And I've covered him before. Panarin will be in the upcoming points and or power play points video. Same thing with Gaudreau. I've covered Anders Lee a bit in other videos, targeting him as a very deep but consistent 30-goal guy with minimal peripheral coverage. But the next guy, and I did want to take a look at this, it's an interesting file, is Nick Ehlers. So Nick Ehlers' goal production has been very consistent, and there is a pattern that emerged in his data. So he spent 3 years around that .33 to .35 range. Then he took a big jump in 2021 to 0.44 goals per game last year. And despite a down year for point production, he increased his goal per game average slightly to 0.45 goals per game. So that could either mean that he's got one more year as a mid to high 30 goal scorer, or he could be breaking out and trending in the right direction. That's a 36 goal pace, still ownable at that ADP. So, and then the point production is a little bit different over that time span. So 0.73, 0.59, 0.81, and then 0.97. That was a breakout year in 2021, and then a 0.88 last year. So this production is ownable, if not elite. So that 0.97 would have been his best year. I would expect him at his best to exceed that. So that could potentially happen this year with a coaching change if things work out well, but there is a little bit of risk there just because of the fluctuation. Now, his shot numbers are what surprised me the most and probably contributed to that increase in goal scoring. So last year, 3.95 shot per game average, which was 8th in the NHL. If you look at the 5-year totals, 2.8, 2.5, 2.8, 3.1, and then 3.95. So trending in the right direction over the last 3 years, but with a relatively high floor in the 2.5 to 2.8 range. His power play numbers, they're unownable with the exception of 2021, where he averaged 0.27 power play points per game for 13 power play points. But even though that per game pace is good, the total number wouldn't have done much for your fantasy team, just not enough volume there. Hopefully Rick Bowness can turn that power play around. So he's a high volume shooter, a mid to 30s, low 40s goal scorer with some overall point production potential. He did face some injuries last year, and that hasn't, he hasn't been able to stay that healthy. So if you look at the last 5 years, 62 games, 47 games, and 56, 71 games, 62 games, and then 82 5 years ago. And that may be why he's available in the late 5th, early 6th round. But what you'd be banking on by taking Ehlers is a bounce back in production above that 0.97 point per game level from 2021. Last year, he was 0.08 point per game under his average, and that was in a year when scoring was up. So I attribute that to the injury, and now he'll either be playing with Mark Scheifele, who's a point per game guy, or Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's definitely fantasy ownable. And they're both, able to complement his production. They can either finish off the chances that he creates because he's got a ton of speed, or they could end up setting him up and he could be the finisher because he's kind of added that goal scoring touch over the past couple of years. Not a lot of overall category coverage for Ehlers, but that shot volume would definitely be a reason to target him with the goal production as a nice complementary piece to his file. And as I mentioned before, once you get out of the first few rounds, you're either going to get a guy like Ehlers, who is elite in 1 to 2 categories, or a guy who's good but not great in 3 or 4 categories. It's just a matter of how you're building your team and what categories you need to cover at different points in the draft. So if you're looking for a shot/goal guy in this range, you could do a lot worse than Nick Ehlers. Now, let's take one last look at this 5-year goal per game data. And the only other guy on here I wanted to touch on was Gabe Landeskog at ADP 30.8 right here. That's good for a 34 goal pace, but there is a bit more to his file, and we need to bring up last year's data to see that. So let's look at the 21-22 data. In this graph, Kreider is obviously skyrocketing to the top, but so is Landeskog, putting up a 0.588 goal per game pace. That's a 48 goal pace over 82 games. He was hurt a little bit last year, but that's good for 4th in the league. But that's not all. Now, as I bring in the goal per game data from the second half of last season, look at this incredible 0.789 goal per game average in the second half last year. He scored 15 goals in the final 19 games of the season after returning from that injury. So it's impossible to say how much that will carry over to this season, but it does show me that when he wants to, he can be an elite goal scorer. So let's take a look at the overall file. That massive goal scoring pace was an outlier when it comes to his 5-year average. And if you look at it season by season, 0.58, 0.37, 0.38, 0.46, 0.32. So you can see he does fluctuate a little bit, but you get a sense of the floor and the ceiling for his goal production. So at worst, he's a high 20 goal scorer. At best, he's a 48 plus goal scorer. And for a short stretch, at his absolute best, when he was scoring at a 64 goal pace in the second half last year, that could be his ultimate ceiling in terms of goal production. But I doubt he would be able to keep that up for the full 82-game season. Lots of volatility in that file, but it seems to me that Landeskog adapts to whatever his team needs. If they need a shutdown center, he can fill that role. If they need him dishing to McKinnon and Rantanen, he can do that. Or if they need him to drive the bus and be the trigger man, he can do that as well. His point totals, more the same in terms of volatility. 1.15 last year, 0.96, 0.81, 1.02, and then a 0.79. So up and down. And it looks like he has a good year and then a down year and then a good year, which would project him to regress this season after winning the Cup. Maybe a little bit less incentivized to produce at that elite level for the full 82-game season, and instead maybe pace himself for the playoffs when it matters. I wouldn't say he's incapable of keeping a point per game average, but I would definitely not expect the same 1.15 point per game pace or that massive 0.789 goal scoring pace he was at in the second half last season. Now, his shot numbers are very good at 2.94 last year. His 2.83 5-year average is very consistent there, but his power play numbers are a little bit lower than what I'd expect, with only 15 power play points. Though that 0.28 5-year average is pretty good, it's just that his line mates average much, much more. So McKinnon, 0.45 5-year average, and Rantanen, 0.42. So if you're drafting him thinking he's basically the same as them on the power play, keep that in mind. He's a bit lower. Now, what he does do instead is throw the body. So 1.84 hits per game, and as you can see on that this hits per game by point producers graph, he's in some good company with JT Miller, Forsberg, Ovechkin, Timo Meier in that range. So this is sorted the higher up on this list, the higher point totals you have, and then the further out is the more hits coverage that you get. So yeah, in terms of point producers who hit, he's up there, and he's definitely targetable for that reason. And this is one category coverage element that may be the reason for his ADP being so high, as the other parts of his file I'd prefer to see in the 5th or 6th round range with Forsberg or Ehlers. But if you get that hits coverage and you're getting exposure to the Colorado offense, that could be the reason for the jump, and he is available at 30.8 in the 3rd round. I don't necessarily think that that's value, but that could be, reasonable for what he provides in terms of his category coverage. If you're going to get a guy who throws some hits, get some power play production, not great power play production, but good, pretty good shot volume, overall pretty good with points, and then the goal production has been coming along nicely at that 30.8 ADP. I might stay away from it just because of the lack of, elite level power play production, but if you wanted to go there, that's not a bad idea either. It's just, beware. Don't try to reach and grab him in the 2nd round or anything crazy like that. There are some really good players available in this range, and I've actually seen Patrick Kane going later than this. So, yeah, don't do that. Take Patrick Kane instead of Gabe Landeskog if he does fall there. But back at the 21-22 data, I won't be able to cover all of these guys, as some of them have been covered before in other videos. I did want to point out that goal-scoring left wingers are more available than right wingers. So when you're looking at the top 50 players last season in terms of goal per game average, there were 17 pure centers, there were 12 pure left wingers, 7 pure right wingers, 3 center left wings, 4 center right wings, and 7 dual position wingers, which is why you see so many names on this list, because of the dual position left wing, right wings, plus the 12 pure left wings and the 3 center left wings. So we'll highlight that in a little bit here. But on this list, you see the 2 players at the top, the 50 goal pace right here. This is the 40 goal pace number. The 30 goal pace is way down here. All these guys were above that. So, in that range, in that grouping, there's 2 of these players weren't on the 5-year goal per game list, mainly because they're both relatively new in league. They had, one was a rookie, a pure rookie, and the other one came over from the KHL. So let's look at Kirill Kaprizov and Jason Robertson next. Kaprizov has obviously only played 2 years, and therefore there isn't much data on him, but what we do have is pretty impressive. So 0.58 goal per game last year, 0.49 in his rookie season, and he shows no signs of slowing down. His assist numbers would be another reason to target him at a 0.75 assists per game last year, and his 0.72 in his rookie year. So that is pretty consistent assist production. And that helps his point per game average climb to 1.33 last year, up from 0.92 his rookie season. But the main reason for that jump was the jump in goals from 27 to 47 goals. So that was a massive jump. I wouldn't necessarily expect the same kind of jump, but he could continue that trend and outpace his 47 goal pace last year. His shot volume is elite level as well, so 3.56 is 14th best in the NHL, and his power play numbers, which weren't great in year one at 0.23 power play points per game, jumped to 0.38 last year, and that included 14 power play goals, good for the 5th best number, tied with a bunch of other players, which is definitely something to target if your league has points waiting for power play goals or power play points in general. Now, it's hard to call anyone at ADP 7 value, but when you're looking for a goal-scoring winger with your first pick, there's Kucherov, Kaprizov, and Rantanen, and then the list starts to dry up a little bit. So you need to pay that price to get access to his file, but you likely won't be disappointed if you do that. He's still playing with Zuccarello and Hartman, and that line was 4th in the league last year in terms of total goal production. So that production will likely continue as nothing has changed. Now, speaking of very productive lines in the NHL last year, the Robertson, Hintz, Pavelski line eked out the Kaprizov line for 3rd in the league with 51 goals on the season, and they too will likely stay together this year. So Robertson broke out and established himself as a prolific goal scorer last year with a .55 goal per game average. That's 41 goals, up from .33 goal per game and 17 goals in his rookie season. He's trending in the right direction, but obviously not much data to try to predict if there will be regression this season, though what I just mentioned with his line mates may signal that he could do this again. Now, last year he was above a point per game with 79 points in 74 games, up from the previous year where he was still a .88 point per game rookie, which is very good, and that's why he was up for the Calder. So that could be his floor if you're looking at that. It's just not a lot of data to go off of. So if you look at the shot numbers, they're good. They're not great, but they're very good. Took a big leap from year one to year two, 2.49 to 2.97. And if that trend continues, he'll likely be a top 25 volume shooter in the league. Just a matter of, if that trend can hold up. His power play numbers took an even larger jump from year one to year two. So in year one, 0.11 power play points per game. Last year, 0.28, adding 13 power play goals on top of that as well, which again is helpful in a points league with power play goals weighted. Now, if that trend continues, he could become one of the elite power play options in the league, and you may be able to access his breakout power play season in the 4th round at ADP 48.6. The determining factor in my mind is the continuity between that power play unit and Heiskanen, who will now be quarterbacking it. And if all goes well, you could expect a bump from that 0.28 number. But if they don't work the same without Klingberg, then he's at least ownable just because of his goal production, his point production, and his shot coverage. So he'll get you at least 3 categories. And then that power play number is a little bit more of a risk type of file because he's trending in the right direction, but the numbers aren't quite elite level. But you could be buying low on a breakout season. So that could be something to keep in mind if you're looking to target him in the 4th round. I definitely think he's value at 48.6. Now, I didn't really give you enough time to take a look at this long list of goal-scoring wingers, so let's pause here for a minute. And these are the guys that are highlighted here are guys with dual position eligibility. So Kreider is left, right wing. Gabe Landeskog is a center, left wing. These guys, I believe, are all left wing, right wing. Same with these guys as well. So that could be another thing to look at if you value positional flexibility. These are your options. But what it does also show you is that the upper echelon goal-scoring left wingers are typically single position eligible. So Ovechkin, Connor, Kaprizov, Robertson, Guentzel, Tkachuk, Kane, Gaudreau, Pacioretty, all these guys, single position. So that may be why Chris Kreider and Gabe Landeskog are at a little bit elevated ADPs. Obviously, they both get the hits coverage as well. So those two factors are probably why they're so high. And that, initially when I saw those two guys up at that level, I was kind of questioning it a little bit, but the more I dug into the files, that could be why. The positional flexibility and the hits kind of put them over the top. Now, before I end this video, I did want to highlight a deep value play that a lot of people have forgotten about due to his injury-riddled season last year. But in deep leagues, this could end up being a really nice file, and that is Jakub Vrana. So Vrana is currently going at ADP 166.4 in the 14th round, and that is likely because of injury history and his relative obscurity on a bad Red Wings team that nobody wanted to watch last year. But at that ADP, you're getting access to some excellent goal production, albeit in a limited sample size last year. But if you look at last year's numbers, he scored at a 0.5 goal per game pace, 13 goals in 26 games, and that is a limited sample size. But just for fun, I checked his ranking last year, and he was 24th in the league in terms of goal per game average. So sampling bias, perhaps, but he has trended up every one of the last 5 seasons in that production. So 0.17, 0.29, 0.36, 0.38, and then a 0.5 last year. So a very clear trend in the right direction. His 5-year pace is a 0.34, just shy of a 30-goal pace over an 82-game season. But I would consider that his floor for this year, given the strong trend in the upward direction and the increased competitiveness of the Red Wings in general. Now, his 0.73 point per game last year is not great, but it is ownable, especially at that ADP. There are probably guys who will get you better point coverage, but maybe not better goal coverage. And that point per game average is pretty consistent over the last 3 seasons. So 0.75, 0.72, and 0.73. So he's right in that range every year. And I would definitely look to that as his floor, and then expect a bump from that this year, as the Red Wings made a ton of changes in the offseason. So then on top of that, his shot numbers aren't anything to write home about. But in the 14th round, potentially as a waiver pickup, that is reasonably good shot volume, 2.5 shots per game. And he's been above 2 shots per game in each of the last 3 seasons. So his likely line mates will be Andrew Kopp and David Perron, both of whom are relatively productive players. And I highlighted Perron in that right wingers video for deep value. And I didn't really realize I'd be highlighting his line mate for this video, but the talent is there for Vrana, and we've seen it in flashes. If you're going to take this file, you're going to, hope that he's, you're kind of banking on that improved Detroit offense and the chemistry of that line combination to give you low risk and high upside on a goal scoring left winger. His power play numbers weren't great last year at a 0.23, but right now, according to wingsnation.com, he is penciled in on that power play 1. And that may be subject to change in training camp, and I would personally put Perron in that spot instead. But it is something to monitor in training camp, because if he gets that spot, he could be worth a look, especially in deeper leagues, and you could be banking on an uptick in that power play production. And then on top of that, you're probably factoring in some goal production and shot coverage as well. Nothing crazy, not elite level by any stretch, but for deeper leagues, deeper plays, this could be one of those guys that most people have forgotten about. He doesn't have that name value, and I have seen him there. If you're looking at your last pick in the draft or your second to last pick in the draft, he usually is hanging around that range. So he could be an option if you make it through your whole draft and you're still looking for goal or shot coverage. Now, we covered a lot today, and it's important to remember that the guys we saw on that 5-year average list are more reliable goal scorers and shot volume players as well, and they will inherently have less risk associated with picking them. And that's what you want in the early rounds of your draft. You don't need to be afraid of risk in general, but you need to take that risk later in your draft to make sure that the guys that you pick with your first 5 or 6 picks are reliable and not full of question marks and hopium. So this 21-22 list is a more complete look at these guys who performed well last year, but it is important to remember, as I remind you in every video, that goal scoring was up from 5.9 goals per game to 6.3 goals per game last year. And these were the main beneficiaries. A lot of these left wingers were the guys who soaked up a lot of that excess goal production. So some of these files are due for natural regression unless scoring maintains that pace, which I don't personally expect it to. But if you pair this information with a solid draft strategy, you will likely have drastically better results. And if you don't have a draft strategy, I have one for you. It's linked in the description below. It's also a playlist on my channel. It's 4 or so simple rules that will instantly make your team better unless you're already a fantasy expert with a strategy. But I want to thank you all again for watching until the end and leaving a bunch of comments on my videos. I appreciate getting back to as many of you as I can. And I will see you in the next one.